The champagne flutes shattered, not with a celebratory pop, but with the earth-shattering force of a bomb, and in that instant, Rashid Alhamday's carefully constructed world, his supposed victory, dissolved into a maelstrom of fire and steel. Beirut, January 22, 1979. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and the promise of a long, joyous night, now thrummed with the vibrations of Arabic music. A vibrant backdrop to the wedding of the year. The Hotel St. George's was a palace of light, spilling its golden glow onto the Mediterranean. Inside, the grand ballroom pulsated with life. Guests, a kaleidoscope of Lebanese politicians, Palestinian dignitaries, and international journalists, mingled and danced. Their laughter echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Nabi Farouk, the groom's chosen alias, a man of sharp intellect and cultivated charm, moved through the throng with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His tailored tuxedo, a stark contrast to the flowing robes worn by some of the other guests, seemed to absorb the light, reflecting the polished gleam of his dark eyes. He smiled, a genuine, albeit rare, expression, at a compliment from a French correspondent, his perfect Arabic rolling off his tongue with the practiced fluency of a seasoned diplomat. He had every reason to be pleased. For years, he had lived in the shadows, hunted, a ghost. But now, he was a respected member of society, a consultant to influential figures, a man reborn. Tonight, he was marrying Layla Mansour, a former beauty queen, a woman who symbolized the new life he'd so meticulously crafted. The risks, the paranoia, the constant fear of discovery, all were things of the past. He was safe, he was home. He watched Layla radiant in a gown of shimmering white lace, laughing with her family, the sound like wind chimes in the warm Lebanese air. He felt a rare surge of something akin to contentment. This was the pinnacle, the culmination of everything he had fought for, the validation of his choices. He raised his own glass, the amber liquid swirling, and offered a silent toast, not just to his bride, but to his own survival. To the audacity of his ambition, he was in his element, a master of disguise, a predator in plain sight, and no one, not even the hawk-eyed security detail hired for the wedding, suspected a thing. Outside, the balmy Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of the sea and the distant hum of the city. Discreetly positioned, a handful of bodyguards, hand-picked for their unwavering loyalty, patrolled the perimeter. They were vigilant, but not unduly alarmed. They had been assured the threat was minimal. This was, after all, a wedding. But within the revelry, within the sea of well-wishers and acquaintances, moved three individuals who did not belong. Three faces inserted into this celebration with the precision of a surgeon and the cold calculation of assassins. They observed, they waited, they blended seamlessly into the crowd, appearing to enjoy the festivities. They shared the warmth, the music, the laughter of the guests, their smiles, a stark contrast to the darkness that lurked within their hearts. They were the ones who knew the truth, that this night, bathed in the glow of celebration, was not the end of a beginning, but the beginning of an end. They were not there to celebrate. They were there to execute. They were there for Nabi Farouk. The explosion ripped through the Beirut night, a brutal symphony of shattered glass and twisted metal, instantly ending the carefully constructed life of Nabi Farouk. The detonation, however, was not the end of the story. It was a devastating culmination of years of meticulous planning and patient observation, a grim testament to the enduring reach of vengeance. He, like a phantom, was the shadow architect of the Munich massacre. The strategic mind behind the slaughter, a man deemed too valuable to risk in the field, making him a prize for those who sought justice. Nabi Farouk, once Rashid Al-Hamed, had painstakingly rebuilt himself. He moved through the world with a newfound confidence. The paranoia of the hunted gradually replaced by the comforts of a life meticulously crafted. After Munich, he disappeared the Mossad's initial fury, unable to find his trace. He resurfaced years later in the diplomatic circles of Beirut, using his charm, intellect, and network of contacts to build a new identity and reputation. He understood that survival required more than simply avoiding detection. It demanded reinvention. He became a respected intellectual, fluent in several languages, and his past became a carefully guarded secret. The details of Munich remained shrouded in the shadows of the past, accessible only to a select few with access to the archives. He'd meticulously studied the intricate dance of intelligence and counterintelligence. Understanding the tactics and strategies employed by his pursuers, he had learned from the errors of the past. He cultivated friendships with influential figures, leveraging his connections to secure a degree of protection and legitimacy. His charm masked a cold determination, a calculating mind that could analyze a situation, anticipate threats, and orchestrate maneuvers that would assure his survival. This new life was a far cry from the refugee camps of his youth, or the hidden training grounds where he learned the art of war. Now, he lived in a luxurious apartment, frequented exclusive restaurants, and enjoyed the company of the city's elite. He married a woman of beauty and standing, Layla, further cementing his position in society. Believing his past was buried, the ghosts of Munich forever silenced. He basked in the warmth of social acceptance, mistaking complacency for security. He had outmaneuvered his pursuers, or so he thought. The arrogance, born of a life rebuilt from the ashes of his past, was his undoing. He made mistakes. He grew predictable. The Mossad, never truly relinquishing the hunt, observed his gradual shift in behavior. He allowed himself to relax his guard, to fall into routines that could be exploited. This vulnerability, this sliver of an opening, was all they needed. His wedding, a celebration of his triumph, was also the site of his ultimate demise, a fitting final act for a man whose life had been dedicated to violence and the pursuit of power. He had chosen the battlefield, and now, the battlefield had chosen him. He had orchestrated the death of innocents, and now, it was his time to join them. His carefully built world, his fabricated normalcy, shattered in the blinding flash of an explosion, leaving only ruin and the cold, hard reality of retribution. The explosion tore through the Beirut night. The image of Nabi Farouk's mangled car, a fleeting spectacle on television screens around the world. Yet the real terror, the true ache, hammered its way into Daniel Rosenfeld's gut, a familiar, unwelcome guest from the past. He'd seen the aftermath countless times, the twisted metal, the shattered glass, the silent testimony to calculated violence, but this time, it was a ghost from his own failures that now stared back from the carnage. Daniel hadn't been on the ground in Beirut. His role was less hands-on, more the puppeteer pulling the strings from the sterile fluorescent-lit office in Tel Aviv. He was the one who had vetted the plan, provided the operational sign-off, and, ultimately, bore the responsibility for the lives extinguished in the name of justice. The price of that justice, he knew, was always steep. The question was, had it been worth it? The answer, as always, remained stubbornly elusive. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of exhaustion and frustration he'd perfected over years spent chasing shadows. The files on Nabi, on the Munich massacre, on the legacy of Black September, lay spread across his desk, a paper testament to the relentless, unforgiving nature of his work. He'd lived and breathed the hunt for Nabi Farouk for years, each intercepted communication, each whisper of a lead, each dead end, fueling the obsessive fire that burned within him. He had known, with a certainty that gnawed at his soul, that Nabi would resurface, that his past, like a phantom limb, would eventually ache for him. He just hadn't foreseen it coming in such a public, celebratory way, and with such devastating finality. The mission, he reminded himself, had been a success. Nabi Farouk was dead. The man who'd masterminded the murder of 11 Israeli athletes, the architect of terror, was now reduced to twisted metal and scattered debris. The world would see it as a victory, another triumph of Israeli intelligence against its enemies. There would be praise, commendations, the fleeting satisfaction of a job well done. But for Daniel, the triumph was hollow, tainted by the ghosts of his own past. He remembered the failed mission years ago, the one that had cost him his mentor and left Nabi unscathed. He replayed the images of the operation in Lillehammer, the mistaken identity, the innocent man wrongly killed, the international scandal that forced the Mossad into a humiliating retreat. The failure had been a festering wound, a constant reminder of his inadequacy, of the price of hubris. He'd learned from that failure, meticulously studying Nabi's patterns, his vulnerabilities, the subtle shifts in his behavior that betrayed his apparent security. This time, he'd ensured that all the angles were covered, every contingency accounted for, to prevent a repeat of the past. The plan was flawless, the execution precise, and yet, he stared at the photographs, his gaze fixated on the images of Layla Mansour, Nabi's bride, a beautiful young woman whose life was extinguished in a blast of violence she never invited, a victim of collateral damage. The reports were just beginning to filter in, the details of her life, her beauty, her innocence. It was inevitable, the planners had warned him, a necessary evil, they claimed. But the reality of her death struck a nerve within him, leaving him colder. The cost of their victory, as always, had been measured in blood and shattered lives. He could taste the familiar bitterness of that cost, the lingering taste of regret that clung to him like a shroud. He knew this victory was far from a resolution. The cycle, he feared, would continue. The ghosts would linger, and the hunt, relentless as ever, would go on. The shriek of the explosion still echoed in Nabi Farouk's ears. A phantom ring against the backdrop of wedding music before the world vanished in a blinding flash. Now, years later, Nabi had rebuilt his life, shed the shadows that once clung to him like a second skin. He moved through the world with a newfound lightness, a confidence forged in the fires of survival, and a carefully constructed veneer of normalcy. Beirut, once a city of whispered dangers, had become a haven. The vibrant chaos, the scent of spices mingling with the sea breeze, the familiar rhythm of the call to prayer, all were comforts, proof of his escape. He'd traded in the clandestine meetings, the hushed phone calls, for the sun-drenched terraces of cafes and the polite banter of diplomats. He was no longer the hunted, he was a respected intellectual, a man whose opinions were sought after, whose presence at social gatherings was anticipated. His apartment, overlooking the Mediterranean, was a testament to his new life. Gone were the Spartan rooms, the hidden caches of cash and false passports. In their place were elegant furnishings, bookshelves overflowing with philosophy and poetry, and a terrace garden where he cultivated exotic herbs. He dined at the finest restaurants, his conversations flowing easily with journalists, academics, and politicians. The weight of the past seemed to have lifted. He'd become a fixture at diplomatic receptions, his sharp wit and eloquent pronouncements earning him invitations to the highest circles. He found a certain thrill in this acceptance, a sweet vindication. He even occasionally met with Western intelligence figures, careful to maintain the appearance of impartiality, subtly dropping hints of his past to enhance his mystique, turning his old life into a kind of legend. He'd learned to play the game, to weave through the labyrinthine world of international politics with an uncanny grace. He'd mastered the art of seeming to be what he wasn't. He married a woman of beauty and influence, a woman whose connections solidified his standing and opened doors he could never have imagined. Layla Mansour was a former beauty queen, a dazzling presence who radiated an effortless charm. She was intelligent, ambitious, and loved the life he provided. Their relationship, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, was a further shield against the ghosts of his past. He loved watching her laugh, her head thrown back, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. He was, by all accounts, a man who had won. He'd survived the years of relentless pursuit, the whispers in the night, the constant fear of discovery. He'd built a new identity, a new life, a life where he felt safe. The paranoia, the vigilance, the constant fear had all faded into a distant memory. He'd convinced himself, perhaps foolishly, that the past was truly behind him. He'd finally stopped looking over his shoulder, a fatal miscalculation. He was, as they say, living on borrowed time. The champagne flutes, once overflowing with celebration, now lay shattered on the marble floor, reflecting the carnage. The joyous music has been replaced by the echoing wail of sirens, a symphony of destruction that has abruptly ended Nabi Farouk's reign of perceived invincibility. The wedding, a symbol of his triumph over fear, became the backdrop for his ultimate demise. The opulent ballroom pulsed with the rhythm of the party, a blur of silk and tailored suits, a testament to Nabi's hard-won acceptance. He moved through the crowd, a phantom of his former self, no longer the hunted, but the celebrated. He'd traded in the shadows for the spotlight, the life of a wanted man for the allure of a respectable citizen, a man of intellect and charm. Tonight, he was the bridegroom, the center of attention, the proud husband of Layla Mansour. His eyes, once filled with the cold calculation of a strategist, now held a warmth reserved for his beautiful bride. He'd conquered his enemies, he believed he'd escaped their grasp, built a life that was a testament to his cunning, his resilience. The wedding was his victory lap, a final, defiant act of erasure. The past, he thought, was buried beneath the gilded trappings of his new reality. He'd chosen a church steeped in history and reverence, a deliberate act of defiance against those who sought his destruction. He laughed, a rich, booming sound, at a joke shared by an old acquaintance, a Lebanese politician who, like others, had once viewed him with suspicion, but now embraced him, eager to gain favor with his connections. He toasted his friends, his allies, the powerful figures who now constituted his circle. They saw a brilliant man, a man of substance, someone whose past was conveniently blurred. They saw the promise of a future as bright as the chandeliers overhead. Outside, the Mediterranean night was a warm embrace. The scent of jasmine and salt mingled in the air. The city lights twinkled like scattered jewels, a deceptive beauty that concealed the violence simmering beneath the surface. He felt a sense of freedom, an exhilaration that came with finally feeling safe, a liberation from the ceaseless paranoia that had consumed him for so long. He'd even allowed his security detail to relax, a decision that stemmed from both confidence and a growing boredom with constant vigilance. What was there to fear? He was among friends, in his new home, protected by a network of influence. This night, he was untouchable. He gazed at Layla radiant in her white gown, and a certainty, almost arrogant in its conviction, settled in his chest. Tonight, he was not just alive, he was reborn. His past was truly dead. He was safe, he was home, he was wrong. The scream echoed through the quiet Beirut night, followed by the sickening crunch of metal and the smell of burning fuel. Miriam Haddad, a woman whose face was etched with the weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights, watched the chaos unfold through her binoculars. She had been the eyes and ears on the ground for months, a ghost in the vibrant city, and now, the meticulously crafted plan was coming to devastating fruition. Miriam's apartment in Verdun was unassuming, a rented space with a view that was her office and prison. She wasn't just observing a target, she was dissecting his life, his routines, the subtle shifts in his security. Each morning, she'd sip bitter coffee, her gaze fixed on the apartment building across the street where Nabi Farouk resided. She'd chart his movements, noting the cars, the routes, the fleeting moments of vulnerability. She was a shadow, a whisper in the wind, a silent observer charting the course of his life, a life she now knew was about to end. The mission had been a long time coming. Weeks turned into months of planning. The constant pressure of Tel Aviv, the silent anticipation, and the weight of the moral implications bore down on her. The wedding had been a catalyst, a rare window of opportunity. Nabi's confidence was his downfall. The illusion of safety, the veneer of respectability, had blinded him to the relentless pursuit. Miriam had painstakingly mapped his route, pinpointing the perfect kill zone, a narrow street where the car bomb hidden in a dilapidated Volkswagen Beetle would deliver its deadly payload. The anticipation had been a physical ache, a tight knot in her stomach that only the execution of the plan could relieve. Days bled into one another, filled with the mundane and the meticulous. She'd shadowed Nabi's morning walks, the casual strolls that seemed to mock the impending danger. She'd noted the security detail, the subtle shifts in their alertness. She had observed the route back from the hotel, the final stretch of road that led him toward the jaws of his own destruction. Her senses were hyper-aware, the scent of exhaust fumes, the distant hum of traffic, the weight of the binoculars in her hands. The city breathed around her, oblivious to the precision with which life was about to be extinguished. The day of the wedding, she felt an almost detached calm. The knowledge that the wheels were in motion, the intricate mechanism of death humming into life, created a strange clarity. She watched the guests arrive, their faces filled with joy and anticipation. Then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the convoy began to move. The lead car, the escort, passed the kill zone. Miriam held her breath. The second vehicle, the the Chevrolet carrying Nabi and his new bride, emerged into her sight line. The final moment of precision, of control, was upon her. In Tel Aviv, Daniel's voice was in her ear, giving the green light. With a deep breath and a silent prayer, she squeezed the trigger on her remote detonator. The world exploded, first in a deafening roar, then in a fiery dance of destruction. The scream, the crash, the smoke, then only silence. The world dissolved in a heartbeat of fiery orange metal, screaming against metal, flesh ripped apart by a storm of ball bearings, and then silence, punctuated only by the screams of the living. The Mossad's plan, years in the making, now rested on the cusp of completion. Back in Tel Aviv, the plan, dubbed Verdun, was etched onto maps, photographs, and intercepted communications. It was a cold, clinical document, a testament to months of meticulous planning. The central tenet of the operation hinged on the exploitation of complacency. Nabi Farouk, once a phantom haunting the dreams of Israeli intelligence, had become, in his own mind, untouchable. His wedding, a lavish affair in the heart of Beirut, provided the perfect, albeit risky, opportunity. He would be visible, his movements predictable, his guard likely lowered in the celebratory atmosphere, but the location, a bustling city with a significant Palestinian presence, necessitated precision. Any error, any collateral damage, could spell disaster. The team, scattered across Beirut, were a collection of ghosts. Their true identities were buried under layers of cover stories, forged documents, and carefully cultivated personas. The goal was simple: to eliminate Nabi Farouk using a car bomb. The chosen method was a remote detonated device, allowing for maximum control and minimizing risk to the operatives. The device itself, a marvel of Israeli engineering, was constructed with a single, brutal purpose: to ensure that the target was extinguished with lethal effectiveness. The explosive was hidden inside a nondescript Volkswagen Beetle, parked inconspicuously on a narrow street in the Verdun district. Inside, the bomb was packed with plastic explosives and ball bearings, designed to create a wave of death. Back in Tel Aviv, Daniel Rosenfeld, the lead operative, reviewed the plan one last time. He knew the risks. The potential for failure was immense, the consequences devastating. The specter of Lillehammer, the botched operation that had ended in the murder of an innocent waiter, loomed large. But the mission, the eradication of the man responsible for the deaths of so many, was paramount. He had been haunted by this case for years. The faces of the victims, their innocent eyes, were burned into his memory. The core of the operation was the timing, a calculated dance of precision and chance. The team had identified a specific intersection, a blind spot in Nabi's security protocol, on his route from the wedding reception. It was a narrow, heavily trafficked street, the perfect killing ground. Miriam Haddad, the agent on the ground, had spent weeks observing Nabi, charting his movements, learning his routines. She knew the exact time of his departure, the composition of his security detail, even the make and model of his vehicle. She had become an expert in his habits, his fears, and his blind spots. The bomb was primed. The detonation device was armed. The signal would come from Tel Aviv. Daniel would give the order. One small click. In the meticulously planned apartment overlooking the designated kill zone, another operative was stationed, binoculars fixed on the street below. Every move, every shift of light, every flicker of the shadows was recorded and relayed. He saw the anticipation in Miriam's eyes when she made the final confirmation. The car bomb had been wired to a receiver. When the signal came, the explosion would come. It was a race against time, a dance of death. The lives of many, perhaps a nation's safety, lay in the balance. The stage was set for the final act. The champagne flute shattered in Nabi's hand as the explosion ripped through the Beirut night. The echo of the blast, a jarring symphony to the triumphant wedding march. The church doors, heavy and ornate, swung open, spilling the first rays of the setting sun across a throng of Nabi, resplendent in his bespoke tuxedo, offered a dazzling smile to the camera, a picture of marital bliss. Layla, his bride, a vision in white lace, clung to his arm, her eyes alight with joy, oblivious to the metal death that was being expertly prepared just a few kilometers away. Inside the opulent reception hall, the air thrummed with the vibrant energy of celebration. The scent of roses mingled with the subtle perfume of expensive cologne. Crystal chandeliers glittered, casting dancing light on the faces of the assembled guests, dignitaries, journalists, and a scattering of individuals with less innocent purposes. Nabi moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of a man accustomed to command. He shook hands with Palestinian officials, exchanged pleasantries with Lebanese politicians, and even charmed a few foreign correspondents with his wit. He was a man reborn, a phoenix rising from the ashes of his past. The weight of years, the paranoia that had once consumed him, seemed to have finally lifted. He was, for this fleeting moment, truly safe. He saw the faces of old comrades, eyes that once held a shared history of violence and defiance. But tonight, they reflected only admiration and camaraderie. He had built a new life, a respectable life, a life where he could finally exhale, where the ghosts of Munich no longer haunted his every waking moment. He glanced at Layla, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the candles on their table. He felt a surge of possessive pride, a fierce protectiveness. He'd done it. He had outmaneuvered his enemies, found love, and built a sanctuary. The whispers of the past, the shadows that had clung to him for so long, seemed to recede, silenced by the joyous cacophony of the celebration. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred within him. The ever-present vigilance, the ingrained suspicion that had been his constant companion, had softened. He had allowed himself to become complacent, to believe that he had truly escaped. He'd meticulously planned for every eventuality, but now, surrounded by the warmth of love and the embrace of a new life, he let his guard down. He was no longer the hunted, but the hunter. And in this moment of perceived victory, he had underestimated the tenacity of his enemies. He did not know that somewhere in the city, an agent was watching, waiting, and preparing for the final act. The orchestra struck up a celebratory tune, and Nabi raised his glass, offering a toast to his bride, to their future. As he spoke the words, the warmth of the room, the promise of the evening, cocooned him in a false sense of security. He knew the world he lived in, was built on betrayal, subterfuge, and shadows. But tonight, in this sanctuary of his own making, he felt invincible. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, truly free. He just didn't know how little time he had left. The world exploded into a silent inferno for Rashid Alhamdeh and Layla Mansour. The joyous wedding day abruptly ending in a symphony of twisted metal and shattered glass. Minutes earlier, as the last of the reception guests offered farewells and congratulations, the bride and groom, blissfully unaware of the death that awaited, had entered their Chevrolet sedan, their entourage of security vehicles falling into formation. Now, the convoy strung out in a familiar order, began the journey that would end Rashid's reign of terror. The champagne buzz, the music, the celebratory air, they were all fading memories now, replaced by the hushed tension that gripped the team in the apartment overlooking Verdun. Miriam, her eyes glued to the binoculars, held her breath. Every detail of the convoy, from the gleaming black vehicles to the hardened faces in the lead car, was imprinted on her mind. The air hung thick with anticipation, the hum of the city fading into a background drone. Her hand, steady, hovered over the radio, a silent conduit to the team in Tel Aviv, and ultimately, to Daniel. The convoy, as predicted, turned onto a familiar stretch of road, navigating the narrow streets with the practiced ease of those who knew the terrain. The lead car, its occupants alert, scanned the surroundings, eyes sweeping across darkened doorways and shadowed alleyways. The second car, a robust Chevrolet, carried Rashid, Layla, and a single bodyguard in the front seat. Behind them, a third vehicle, containing more security personnel, completed the small motorcade. Miriam tracked their progress, her heart pounding a staccato rhythm against her ribs. She recited the mantra the Mossad drilled into them. Observe, assess, execute. This was the execution phase, the point of no return. A wave of nausea, both familiar and unwelcome, washed over her. This was not a game. It was a life, or rather, lives, being extinguished. Her mind momentarily conjured Rashid's face, the image she had seen in countless photos, the man who had eluded them for so long. She thought of the Munich Olympics, the unspeakable loss of innocent athletes, the years of planning, and the meticulous patience that had brought them to this single moment. She pushed the image away, focusing instead on the task at hand. Sentiment, she had learned, was a luxury they could not afford. The Chevrolet, now a mere block away, was approaching the designated kill zone, a narrow passage, constricted by buildings on either side, where a parked Volkswagen Beetle contained the deadly payload. The sun, sinking below the horizon, cast long shadows, obscuring the details of the street. Streetlights flickered on, casting an eerie glow on the scene. In Tel Aviv, Daniel was seated at his desk, his face a mask of cold concentration. He knew every detail of the operation, every calculation, and every risk. He had spent years pursuing this target. He thought of the file, the countless documents and photographs, the intercepted communications, the whispers of informants. This was the culmination of everything. He gave the final order. Miriam's hand tightened on the radio, her knuckles white. The Chevrolet slowed, easing into the kill zone. The moment had arrived. She took a deep breath, and then, with a barely perceptible nod, she relayed the signal. The world fractured into a blinding white flash, a roar tearing through the air, before the inferno. Daniel Rosenfeld, his face illuminated by the stark, sterile glow of a Tel Aviv command center, gripped the edge of the polished mahogany table, knuckles white. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were glazed with a peculiar blend of focus and dread. He'd lived and breathed this operation for months, poring over intelligence reports, agonizing over every detail. Now, the final moments were unfolding, a symphony of deadly precision orchestrated across the miles. Miriam's voice, calm and steady despite the mounting tension, crackled over the secure comms, painting a vivid picture of the scene in Beirut. Convoy is en route, approaching the kill zone. All elements in position, each word was a tiny hammer blow against Daniel's already frayed nerves. He could almost smell the exhaust fumes, the faint scent of orange blossoms mingling with the metallic temps of fear. The room around him was a hive of activity, technicians hunched over screens, analysts whispering urgent assessments. But Daniel was lost in his own private vortex, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He pictured Nabi Farouk, the man they hunted, the ghost of Munich, oblivious in the back of his Chevrolet. His new bride beside him, probably laughing, secure in the belief that he had evaded justice. The wedding, a symbol of Nabi's audacity, had made him both vulnerable and the ultimate prize. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel, the hunter becoming the hunted in the most audacious of settings. A young analyst, her face pale, offered a quick, hushed assessment. Trajectory confirmed. Estimated time to target, 30 seconds. Daniel nodded, his throat suddenly tight. This wasn't a video game. This was real life, and in 30 seconds, lives would be irrevocably altered. He could feel the pulse in his temples throbbing in time with the countdown. Another image flashed across his mind, the faces of the athletes, young, vibrant, their lives stolen too soon. The memory of the failed mission in Lillehammer, a scar on the Mossad's legacy. He couldn't afford another failure. Justice, however belated, had to be served. He had to be sure, absolutely sure, that this time they had it right. He leaned forward, his hand hovering over the red button that would initiate the detonation. The weight of his finger felt like a lead weight. He could almost feel the heat, the concussive force, smell the acrid scent of burning metal and flesh. In those final seconds, the faces of those who had suffered, the lives lost, became his driving force. He saw Miriam's eyes, a distant echo from Beirut. He knew that the team would only initiate the charge when all parameters were locked in. But he also understood that the moment was near, and he was the one with the authority. The analyst gave a quiet alert. Target vehicle. Entering the zone, Daniel closed his eyes, his breath hitching in his chest. He saw his own face reflected in the polished surface of the table, a weary, haunted face etched with the scars of war and the burden of his conscience. He would be the instrument of destruction, the harbinger of death. He would be the one to give the order. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knew this would haunt him, a ghost he would carry to the grave. His voice was a rasp, a whisper in the echoing command center. Authorize execution. He pressed the button. The world ended in a flash of orange and black, a supernova of metal and shattered glass that tore through the Beirut night and ripped Nabi Farouk's world apart in a heartbeat. The detonation, a monstrous bloom of kinetic energy, slammed into the Chevrolet, lifting it off the ground as if it were a child's toy. For a split second, everything was suspended time sound. Life before the brutal symphony of destruction took over. The explosion's initial shockwave was a physical blow, a concussive force that slammed against the buildings lining Verdun Street. Windows on either side of the narrow thoroughfare imploded, showering the pavement with shards of glass that sparkled like a malevolent constellation. The air filled with the acrid stench of burning fuel and the metallic temps of blood. The Chevrolet, twisted into a mangled carcass, hung for a moment, suspended in the air before crashing back to earth with a sickening thud. The car's frame, once gleaming and polished, was now a tortured skeleton of twisted steel, spewing flames and plumes of black smoke. Inside the car, the world had become a vortex of chaos. Nabi in the back seat felt the crushing force of the blast as if a giant hand had reached down and squeezed the life out of him. The roar of the explosion was a physical pressure against his eardrums. Ball bearings, embedded within the bomb's design, tore through the thin metal of the car like bullets, shredding flesh and pulverizing bone. He saw a flash of light, felt a searing pain, then nothing. His last conscious thought was a fleeting regret for a life finally won, only to be stolen away in a moment of violent finality. Beside him, Layla Mansour, the woman he had just married, the woman who had brought a new vibrancy into his life, became a victim. The force of the explosion ripped through her. Her face, moments earlier radiant with happiness, was now contorted in a silent scream. Her eyes, once sparkling with life, were fixed in a glassy stare. Her body, her dress, the very air around her, was stained crimson. In the front seat, the driver, Nabi's bodyguard, survived the blast, but he was in mortal danger. Burning metal, shards of glass and ball bearings tore into his flesh. He tried to move, to shout, but he was pinned in the wreckage, paralyzed by pain and the crushing weight of the car. The trailing cars in the convoy, seeing the explosion, screeched to a halt. Bodyguards leaped from the vehicles, weapons drawn, shouting in confusion and fear. Chaos reigned. The street was transformed into a scene of carnage. A heavy cloud of smoke rose above the wreckage. The air crackled with the sounds of screams and shouts. From the apartment overlooking the street, Miriam Haddad watched the scene unfold. She had been holding her breath for the entire execution. Now, she exhaled slowly, her face a mask of professional detachment, although her heart pounded. She had executed her mission. The target was dead. The mission was complete. The team in Tel Aviv sent her the pre-arranged code. She had her exit plan ready. Below, the first of the Lebanese security forces and Hezbollah members reached the scene of the bombing. The air was a whirlwind of sirens, frantic shouts, and the bitter scent of burning metal. The carnage was gruesome. The face of the new bride Layla was everywhere on the news. The world would soon come to learn how much it cost for this victory. The world erupted in a crimson geyser of fire and twisted metal. The joyous celebration of a wedding night transformed into a scene of utter devastation. The explosion ripped through the heart of Beirut, shattering the relative peace of the city and leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. Chaos reigned in the immediate aftermath. The air, thick with the acrid smell of burnt fuel and cordite, was rent by screams of agony and the blaring sirens of approaching emergency vehicles. Smoke billowed into the twilight sky, obscuring the familiar facades of the buildings lining the street. The once pristine pavement was now a canvas of twisted metal, shattered glass, and scattered debris. The mangled remains of the Chevrolet, the vehicle carrying Rashid Alhamed and his bride, Layla, were a testament to the bomb's lethal power. Its doors hung open like broken wings, and its windows were blown out, offering a grotesque view of the carnage within. The Volkswagen Beetle, the assassin's vehicle, was reduced to a charred, unrecognizable shell, a silent witness to the calculated execution. Panic erupted amongst the wedding guests and nearby residents. People spilled out of buildings, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and horror. Some ran towards the scene, drawn by a morbid curiosity or a desperate hope to help. Others stumbled back, their eyes wide with disbelief, fleeing from the epicenter of violence. Wounded figures stumbled in the wreckage, their clothes torn, their bodies stained with blood. The air was thick with the sounds of moaning and the panicked shouts of rescuers, who began desperately searching through the debris for survivors. Miriam, the Mossad agent who had monitored Nabi's movements, watched the scene unfold from her apartment window, her breath held in her chest. She had executed her mission perfectly. The bomb had detonated precisely when it should have, at the most vulnerable moment. But she wasn't immune to the horror that had unfolded. The sight of the burning wreckage, the knowledge of the lives extinguished in a single devastating moment, brought with it a heavy weight of moral responsibility. She had pulled the trigger, in a sense, and now she must live with the consequences. The first responders, a mix of Lebanese police, civil defense teams, and volunteer medics, arrived on the scene and began to establish a perimeter, pushing back the growing crowd of onlookers. Their faces were grim as they assessed the situation and began the grim task of retrieving the dead and tending to the injured. The weight of the moment was palpable, the grief thick in the air. Meanwhile, rumors and speculation about the bombing began to spread like wildfire. The initial whispers were of a car accident, but it quickly became clear that this was something far more sinister. The international press, always eager for a headline, descended upon the scene, cameras flashing, notebooks at the ready. Journalists from around the globe jostled for position, desperate to capture the first images of the devastation and gather eyewitness accounts. In the chaos of the immediate aftermath, no one could predict how this single event would ignite new cycles of violence. And for Miriam, the aftermath was a personal reckoning, a confrontation with the true cost of the mission. The champagne had barely dried on the shattered wedding dress before Daniel Rosenfeld was already back in Tel Aviv. The scent of cordite and Mediterranean sea air clinging to his coat like a phantom limb. The Beirut operation, codenamed Verdun, was over. Rashid Alhamd, the architect of Munich, the man who had haunted Daniel for years, was finally dead. But the victory tasted like ash in his mouth. The office in Tel Aviv was sterile, bathed in the cold fluorescent glow of a Monday morning. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine, but beneath the surface, a tremor of unease ran through the room. It wasn't a celebration. There were no toasts, no backslapping, just the grim, focused determination to close the file, to erase any trace of their involvement. Daniel, standing before a bank of monitors, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle upon him, a burden he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. The initial reports from Beirut were already filtering in, chaos, confusion, accusations. The media vultures, circling a fresh kill, were already feasting on the story. The beautiful Layla Mansour, the bride, her name was already being uttered with reverence and sorrow, eclipsing the target of their mission. Daniel knew what the headlines would read: Israeli assassins strike again. He knew the condemnation, the diplomatic fallout. He also knew that within the sterile walls of the Mossad, the operation was deemed a success, a testament to their unwavering commitment. He watched as the data was meticulously scrubbed, the digital ghosts of their agents and their operation deleted from existence. The false identities, the forged documents, the trail of breadcrumbs they had carefully laid, all were meticulously erased. It was a ritual, a necessary evil, the price they paid for operating in the shadows. He saw the faces of the operatives, their eyes weary, their bodies tense with a mixture of relief and regret. They were ghosts, too, anonymous soldiers in a war fought with cunning and stealth. As he oversaw the final stages of the closure, Daniel found himself caught in a loop of regretful thought. The image of the bride, Layla, in her pristine white gown, smiling the day of her wedding, flooded his mind. Her death, a stark reminder of the collateral damage, the price that inevitably accompanied their pursuit of justice. He thought of the young Mossad operative, Miriam Haddad, the one who'd meticulously tracked Alhamd's movements and identified the kill zone. Was she haunted by it? Would she sleep soundly at night? Or would she carry the weight of a life ended, of innocent blood spilled, on her conscience? The file was sealed. The details of the operation, the names of those involved, the precise methods employed, all locked away in a vault, hidden from the prying eyes of the world. Daniel stared at the sealed document, a cold and impersonal tomb. The victory was hollow. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that the ghost of Rashid Alhamd and the specter of the bride would continue to haunt him. Justice, he realized, was a cruel and fickle mistress. He was left with an unending loop of questions, and a profound sense of loss for the human cost of a war that would never truly end. It was a price, he thought, he would continue to pay. The world saw the wreckage of Nabi Farouk's final moment in a flash of heat and twisted metal. A wedding day transformed into a funeral pyre. Now, months later, the dust has settled, both literally and figuratively, in the clandestine offices of the Mossad. Daniel Rosenfeld, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond the mere passage of time, sat in a sterile room, the air thick with the quiet hum of machinery and the ghost of unanswered questions. Before him lay the file, its cover a stark bureaucratic statement devoid of the drama the events it documented had possessed. He ran a hand across his short-cropped hair, the touch a familiar act of self-soothing. The final autopsy report, the grainy photographs of the bomb's aftermath, the terse summaries of witness interviews, all were compiled into a symphony of destruction. Yet, it was the faces that haunted him most. Nabi's frozen in a mask of surprise, his bride's canvas of blood and ruin, and the faces of the operatives involved, now scattered and disappeared, their actions sealed in silence. The mission, codenamed Verdun, had been a success, a surgical strike in the heart of Beirut. Nabi Farouk, the architect of the Munich massacre, had been extinguished. Justice, years delayed, had finally arrived. But, as Daniel stared at the stark black and white images, a sense of hollow victory washed over him. He felt it now, the echo of the explosion reverberating not just through his ears, but also through his very soul. He knew that the death of a man, even a man like Nabi, would not change the world. The cycle of violence, a relentless tide, would continue to pull at the shores of the Middle East. He had seen too much. The innocent had fallen with the guilty, as always. Layla Mansour, a vibrant, innocent woman whose only crime was her love for a man who carried a dark history. Her fate weighed on him as heavily as the knowledge of the many innocent lives lost in the name of political ambitions. He thought of the operatives, the nameless ghosts who had carried out the mission. Had they felt it, the weight of the moral ambiguity, the knowledge that they had crossed a line, a border? He knew they would never truly speak of what they had done, their loyalty bound to the agency, to the cause. Daniel himself would maintain the veil of denial that shrouded their actions. But in the quiet moments of the night, he knew their shadows would linger, a constant reminder of the price of their actions. The file would be sealed, archived, another entry in the endless ledger of conflict. There would be no medals, no parades, no accolades. Just the quiet satisfaction, the cold comfort of knowing that another enemy had been eliminated. He looked one last time at the images, the faces, the fragments of a life and a love tragically cut short. The weight of his burden was enormous, but he understood the nature of his role. He was a sentinel, a keeper of secrets, a man forever bound to the shadows. He exhaled slowly, a sigh that carried the unspoken echoes of the Beirut nights, and closed the file, the final act of a mission that, even in its completion, had left an indelible mark on his soul. The cycle remained, and the next threat was already forming. It was only a matter of time before the Mossad would be called upon again to seek justice in the dark.